Well, this is the cover of our book. For those who don't read Dutch, it says the klok met duizend wijzers, so really translated to the clock with 1,000 hands, or clock hands, but that didn't sound so nice. And the subtitle, How the Biological Clock Influences Your Life. So yes, we wrote it recently, but we spent 2.5 years to do this. It was published in mid-October, so that was really quite recent. And now we're hoping that, well, basically everyone in the Netherlands is going to read it. But we're also, the publisher is already working or trying to, well, find out if there is any intention to go for a translation to different countries. So it was published in a book fair, an international book fair. So far, we haven't heard whether that was successful or not, but hopefully, yeah. Well, for those who can't read Dutch, maybe in the future there will be an English or a Spanish or a French version even. But that for now has to wait. So I'll just, yeah, give a short presentation what this book actually is about. But well, first of all, well, let's see if I can go further. Yeah, why even bother writing a book? Because there's well, already a lot of books about health. Yeah, maybe you have read some, but there's so many books about health, about mental health, even specific, but also about sleep. So sleep is a topic in our book, but it's not specifically a book about sleep. There are already so many books about sleep. Maybe not all evenly scientific based, which is our book, but nevertheless, this is already quite a popular topic, but also about performance, sickness, stress, sports. And all of these topics are part of our book, but are not specifically on one of those, because it's about the biological clock. And we sort of wrote the book because we all also, at least from my perspective, were a little surprised that this topic was not addressed yet, really on a dedicated book. Well, there's a couple of books written by a few scientists, mainly international, not Dutch scientists, really dedicating a book to the biological clock. And we thought it was important because it's, in our view, and if you read the book, by the end, hopefully you think the same, that it's an essential underlying condition for all of the topics that are written above and I just mentioned. So if you want to do sports well, or if you want to address certain diseases, or if you want to sleep well, or have a good state of mental health, the biological clock is, a mechanism that you can't ignore. So that's a main reason why we wrote the book. Everything we discuss is scientific based. So we're both scientists, and we think that's an important part of, addressing different topics. But science communication is sometimes a difficult step for scientists. And writing a book is a way of science communication. And we think it's very important to, make sure that knowledge that is created in the scientific community can be shared to others that can't read scientific papers. So that's what we tried to do with the book. And we also thought it was fun to write. So we're two of those people that actually enjoy writing a lot. So yeah, at least I'd really enjoy every part of the process, even though it took 2 years, but I really enjoyed struggling with the words. So this is a picture. All of the pictures, or almost all of the pictures that I share, are also part of the book. And this is one that comes in quite early. I don't know if you're aware of this experiment, but this was sort of a start of the field of chronobiology. So that studies the biological clock. You can see a plant. It's a mimosa plant, and it opens and closes its leaves every 24 hours. And it was thought that this happened when there was light. So was light really giving the input to the plant to open its leaves, or that was what was always thought, and still a lot of people think. But then it was an experiment where the plant was isolated from light, and the scientists saw that the plant still opened and closes its leaves every 24 hours. That was the first thought that maybe there was something internal to the plant that caused that rhythm of opening and closing its leaves. So that's why there's a question mark to the line of the power of light. So how important was light for this rhythm? So a lot of research followed, which is what we discuss in the first part of our book, where we explain the basics. So it starts, obviously, but you spend a lot of pages on what is the biological clock, because there's a lot of rhythms, there's a lot of subparts of the biological clock. And we also explain that it's not the declining fertility of women with age, because that's still quite often what people think of if they think of the biological clock. We know it's increasing, that people are starting to understand it has to do nothing to do with that, but it has to do with 24-hour rhythms. But to be sure, we explain that in our book as well. So we explain more about the discovery, how was this clock discovered, several elements of it, both in the brain and in the rest of the body. We explain why experiments in caves with people, with actual participants, were essential experiments to discover human rhythms, so rhythms in physiology, but also in cognition. And we explain the mechanism. So, yeah, how does this clock work and how is it related to all of the rhythms that it creates? So just one slide about what actually this biological clock does. You may have heard of it already, I assume, but so it creates or generates 24-hour rhythms everywhere in our body. So that's why you also see in the picture both a clock in the head, but also in the lungs, in the skin, in the intestines. Every organ, actually every cell in our body has the mechanism of an internal clock. And thus everywhere in our body, 24-hour rhythms are created. And that leads to rhythms in, well, cells, organs, and the brain, but also rhythms in behavioral outputs, such as sleep, if you can call that a behavior, but also physiological measures, processes, blood pressure, energy metabolism, cognition, immune system, and so on. So there's rhythms in, well, maybe 1,000 or even thousands of physiological mechanisms. And that's all based by the biological clock and its mechanism behind it. So there's different clocks. I'm not going to explain all of that, but one of the, well, the master clock, as we call it, is located in the brain. So this image is also part of the book. You can see where it's located. So in this cartoon, the brain is a little bit damaged because it's cut open, and because the biological clock is, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'm just going to point to it, in the center of our brain, behind the eyes, on the height of your ears, sort of, the top of your ears, really hidden very well deep in the brain. And this structure has 100,000 cells that have the mechanism, and that's incorporated in our DNA and the genes of the cells that create 24-hour rhythms in those cells, and via all sorts of output pathways, it sends those signals of 24-hour rhythms, the signals of time, to the rest of the brain and to the rest of the body. And why this is a convenient place is because, well, there actually is a connection to light. So as you can see, as you saw in the previous picture, the biological clock in the brain, the master clock, is located very close to the eyes, actually on top of the nerves that come from the eyes. And that's a convenient place because it, in that way, can receive direct input from the eyes, which is direct input from light. So specific cells that we call spheres transfer, this light information to the biological clock. So yes, the light is very important to create rhythms. are actually to synchronize the rhythms. So the rhythms are created in the cells, but light is essential to synchronize the rhythms. Well, this I'm not gonna explain. I assume you understand this, the peak sensitivity of the different wavelengths of light for different cells in the retina. So that we all explain in the first part of the book, and then we continue to the second part, which we call a perfect day. So what would a perfect day look like if we listen to our biological clock? The main message is that we're not the same all day round, even though we try sometimes to expect the same in cognitive performance, for example, both at 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, but we're not the same all day. We can't expect everything just when we want it from, well, our body and also our brain. And we describe in 4 main parts that we have optimal timing for sleep, which is obviously the night, and then we explain how this clock is coordinating sleep, why it's so important to listen to your clock if you want to sleep well. But we also explain why the clock is intertwined with meal timing and mainly with the effects on metabolism to stay healthy. We have optimal time for performance. So that's a part that we explain, and that's both physical and cognitive performance. And we explain why there's a certain part of the day where we, well, have the largest suffering, and I'm gonna come back to that. Yeah, so we're not the same, not all the same. We're not the same the whole day, but we're also not the same. Even though we all have this biological clock, we have slight differences. Again, I'm not sure if you are aware of the concept of chronotypes, which are also easy to explain by early birds and idols. Almost everyone has a feeling that they are either a person that gets up very easily in the morning and can call themselves an early bird. Others are really struggling, and there's a just natural difference, and that changes with age, but also gender has an influence and lifestyle as well. So that's actually what I put up here. So yeah, your chronotype is determined by how your biological clock exactly is. Yeah, I say that. Well, how it exactly works, whether it's running fast or when it's running slow, but also your age and gender play a role in this. And we explain that yeah, further, and also the consequences of having a certain chronotype. So whether you're an early bird or an idol or something in between, we explain certain consequences that, yeah, you may suffer. Then, yeah, like I said, there's a certain times to eat, but there's also certain times that it's best not to eat. And we explain further why it's important that you have well, quite an extensive part of fasting during the day. Maybe you've heard the expression that you should not eat something after dinner. So is that true, or is that, well, what is it based on, or at least from the perspective of the biological clock? Would it indeed be a good idea not to eat anything anymore? And what kind of consequences does it have for your metabolic health? But also breakfast, is that can that be the same for everyone? So in view of the biological clock, what would your clock want? How you divide your meals and what times would be good to hold on to. Then performance at a certain, yeah, not every time during the day you will perform the same. So we dive into sports a little bit more, and this is an example of a study of Marijke and colleagues in which Olympic swimmers were studied. And they saw that Olympic swimmers have faster finish times at the end of the afternoon compared to when they swim in the morning. And actually this difference was so big that it was in 40% of the cases larger than the difference between winning gold or silver. And of course, this is really Olympic level, and well, probably not all of us are competing in any sports at that level, but counting, well, taking your biological clock into account, and if you want to, have certain performances, especially if you're professional, can really make a big difference. And also we explain why it would be good to maybe practice, do your practices both in the morning and in the afternoon. And for most sports, why the peak times would be the afternoon. So yeah, we give a lot of examples in the book how this works. And then, like I said, even though we're trying to talk about a perfect day, we sometimes suffer from certain, well, disturbances of our health. So that can be maybe, yeah, you can think of yourself if you had a fever once. It very often peaks during the evening or at night, while in the morning but also pain. Well, they're really much lower. So you're suffering, physical suffering for certain diseases is very different when, well, in the morning compared to the evening. So we describe a couple of examples here and the mechanism that could explain this. So then after a perfect day, we, well, end the book with the third part, and we describe circadian syndrome. So we explain, we have a lot of examples and describe a couple of topics I'm gonna highlight. What happens if we disturb the clock, because we do that very often. Next one. Yeah. So this sort of summarizes it. You may have all more known somebody, or maybe experienced it yourself. If you have a jet lag, if you have a jet lag for over 3 hours, really physically, but also maybe mentally, suffer from this. It's really a disturbance of your clock, and it has a lot of consequences. We also explain social jet lag, shift work, which is obviously a very big disturbance on a long term. For your biological clock, with so many consequences in health, which is really a big problem. But also we explain how abnormal meal times or chronic stress can have an effect on health, and the base of all of these problems is a disturbance of the clock, and yeah, they're really related to so many diseases, and the list could have been longer, but the most well-known are, for example, obesity and diabetes, mental health problems, but also cardiovascular problems, cancer, fertility problems, and maybe a little bit minor, but can have big consequences as well, that you perform less. For example, if you didn't sleep at the right time, you didn't have optimal sleep, it can lead to accidents, which can be larger or smaller, but can have serious consequences. So disturbances of your clock really lead to trouble. So after a lot of examples, we also add tips, because then we provide the reader tools that you can incorporate, how you can listen to your biological clock into your daily life. And it goes, it also contains tips of the Good Light group, but also we explain why melatonin would be a good or not a good idea, but also all of the other aspects that you can see here. We all discussed that. And just, I had to select a couple of things that I could explain here, but we also talk about the effect of age on the biological clock, because it changes throughout your life, the effect of hormones. So during pregnancy, during the menstrual cycle, and during menopause, the biological clock changes, or at least its rhythms. So we explain about that. We discuss school times, why it would be good if we adjust something to that. Time zones, sleep disorders, a lot more. Mental health is definitely a topic in part 3 as well, because there's a couple of disorders that are really related to disturbance of the biological clock. And we explain why caterpillars need a clock to survive, and that's something that comes actually in part 1. But yeah, we talk a lot about humans, so basically the whole book is about humans. But I started with the plant, and that's also a bottom line that I also really think is very interesting. This mechanism of the biological clock is not just humans. It's yeah, you can find it in every living organism. We don't write about that more in the book, just the caterpillars and the plants, but I think it's good not to ignore that or to forget that. Okay, so that was my presentation.